The headlines were brief, the wording was clinical, but behind that single line was a much larger story that most people completely missed. T.K. Carter, an actor remembered by millions, even if they don't always remember his name, has passed away at 69. And while the cause was officially listed as heart failure, the full picture reveals a quieter, more complicated reality about health, aging, and how easily someone can slip out of view. This isn't about shock. It's about understanding what really happened and why his story didn't end where the headlines did. If you've seen The Thing, you remember him, even if you don't realize it right away. T.K. Carter played Nauls in John Carpenter's 1982 sci-fi classic. Not the loudest character, not the lead, but one of the faces that made the film feel real. That role alone secured him a permanent place in pop culture history. But it was only one chapter of a career that quietly stretched across decades. From The Hawk's Corner to the Steve Harvey Show, from Space Jam to more recent television work, Carter kept showing up, often without fanfare, often without headlines, but always working. And that's important to remember, because the way his life ended contrasts sharply with the way his career was built: steady, consistent, and largely out of the spotlight. So how does someone with such a long resume end up becoming a short news item? The answer starts with the official report, and then goes deeper. According to publicly available information from the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, T.K. Carter's cause of death was listed as systolic heart failure. Contributing conditions reportedly included atrial fibrillation and pulmonary hypertension, both serious cardiovascular issues that can place long-term strain on the heart. These aren't sudden, mysterious conditions. They're chronic, often managed over time, and frequently connected to other underlying health challenges. According to his family, Carter had been dealing with significant medical issues in the period leading up to his passing, including diabetes and ongoing heart problems. Nothing about this suggests foul play. No suspicious circumstances were reported, no indication of external involvement, just a body that had been under stress for a long time. But here's where the story quietly shifts. Because the timeline matters. Law enforcement sources stated that Carter was found in his residence in Duarte, California, after a welfare check was requested. Family members had reportedly not heard from him for several days. They knew about his health concerns. They knew he had high blood pressure. And when communication stopped, they did the responsible thing. Authorities responded, and Carter was found deceased. No signs of foul play were reported. But according to his brother, Harold Carter, there was an additional detail. One that didn't dominate headlines but adds important context. He stated that TK had suffered an apparent head injury prior to being found. What caused it? When did it happen? Did it contribute directly, indirectly, or not at all? Public information does not clearly answer those questions, and responsible reporting doesn't speculate beyond what is known. What is clear is that his health had been fragile, and his body was already under significant strain. And that raises a bigger question, one that goes beyond T.K. Carter himself. Heart conditions like systolic heart failure rarely make noise. They progress slowly. They exhaust the body over time. And when combined with other factors like diabetes or irregular heart rhythms, the margin for error becomes smaller and smaller. For many people, especially older adults living alone, warning signs don't always lead to immediate intervention. Missed calls, delayed responses, assumptions that tomorrow will be better. And then suddenly, there is no tomorrow. This is not uncommon. It's just rarely discussed. But Carter's story doesn't end with how he passed. It also includes what he was still doing right up until the end. And that part matters. What often gets lost in stories like this is a simple fact. T.K. Carter hadn't disappeared. In the years leading up to his passing, he was still taking roles, including a recent appearance in The Company You Keep, a series starring Milo Ventimiglia and Catherine Haina Kim. 3 episodes, a supporting role. Not a comeback tour, not a headline moment, just steady work. For actors like Carter, that kind of presence matters more than spotlight recognition. It means showing up, staying sharp. remaining part of an industry that quietly moves on without waiting for anyone. And that makes the timing of his passing feel especially heavy, because when someone is still working, we don't usually think of them as being at risk of fading away. T.K. Carter's career followed a path many audiences don't fully notice unless they stop and look back. He wasn't marketed as a star. He wasn't chasing controversy. He wasn't reinventing himself every few years to stay visible. Instead, he became something far more stable, a reliable presence. From television comedies to dramas to major studio films, his roles filled in the emotional texture of the stories around him. And that kind of career often leads to an unexpected outcome later in life, respect within the industry, but quiet exits from public conversation. No farewell tour, no major retrospectives, just a few headlines. And then silence, which raises a difficult question. Why do we often only zoom out once someone is gone? Fame doesn't age the way people think it does. It doesn't protect against illness. It doesn't guarantee constant support. And it certainly doesn't prevent isolation. According to his family, Carter had been dealing with serious health challenges for some time. Conditions that require monitoring, care, and consistency. But even with loved ones paying attention, there can be gaps, especially when someone values independence and privacy. And in those gaps, things can quietly go wrong, not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough. And that leads to the part of the story that's hardest to sit with, not because it's shocking, but because it's familiar. The initial reports were short: name, age, cause of death, but a life can't be reduced to a medical classification. Systolic heart failure explains the mechanism. It doesn't explain the years of managing symptoms, the effort it takes to keep working, or the personal reality of dealing with chronic conditions while staying active. Public reporting did what it was supposed to do. Present confirmed information without speculation. But understanding requires more than confirmation. It requires context, and context changes how we see not just his passing, but his legacy. T.K. Carter represents a category of performers who shape culture without dominating it. People who show up in the background of our favorite memories. People whose work outlives their names in our minds. When they're gone, we often realize how present they always were. And that realization usually comes too late to say thank you. So where does that leave the story now? Not with shock, not with speculation, but with something quieter, and maybe more important. There's a common misconception about life in the public eye, that visibility lasts forever, that recognition protects you, that success somehow insulates people from the realities of aging and health. In reality, many performers grow older away from the spotlight, not because they failed, but because the industry moved on. Roles get smaller, appearances become less frequent. And personal challenges are handled privately, not publicly. That appears to have been the case here. By all available accounts, T.K. Carter was navigating serious health conditions while continuing to live independently and work when opportunities came. That balance isn't easy, and it often goes unnoticed, which makes one thing clear. This story isn't just about one actor. Stories like this tend to resurface a familiar pattern. We revisit old performances, we recognize faces we loved, and we realize how many people shaped our cultural memories without ever demanding attention. T.K. Carter's passing quietly reminds us of how many careers exist between household name and forgotten, and how thin that line can be. It also highlights something broader: how chronic health conditions, when combined, can slowly narrow a person's margins, even when they are still active and engaged. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just steadily. So how should this story be remembered? Not through headlines, but through perspective. T.K. Carter's legacy isn't defined by the circumstances of his passing. It's defined by decades of work, by characters that felt real, by moments that stayed with audiences longer than his name did. And that kind of impact doesn't fade just because the coverage was brief. Sometimes the most lasting contributions come from people who never asked to be center stage. Understanding stories like this isn't about dwelling on loss. It's about recognizing patterns. in health, in visibility, and in how we remember people who helped shape the media we love. Because when we understand the full picture, the story doesn't end with a headline. It finally makes sense.